Hello everybody, and welcome to me reading you another video of me reading you Alex Rider, and another one on my channel too, on one of my 168 channels. That's how many I have currently. This one should be 169th apparently. So, let me just carry on reading you this book, okay? Just forget about how many channels I have. By the time you'll be reading it, it should have at least 200 or more. Or if you're more than 21st century, you'll have 1,000 or more. So, let me just carry on reading. Sorry everybody, this doesn't have the chapter name, so I have to go to the contents. Okay, everybody, this is pretty fun. We're gonna finish the book today. I mean it. Chapter 14, The Nuclear Dustbin, page 255. The Nuclear Dustbin, Chapter 14, The Nuclear Dustbin. At 7 o'clock that evening, the door of Alex's cell opened and Conrad stood there wearing a suit and a tie. The smart clothes made his half-bald head, ruined face, and red, twitching eye even uglier than usual. He reminded Alex of an expensive Guy Fawkes on bonfire night. You are invited to dinner, Conrad said. No thanks, Conrad, Alex replied. I'm not hungry. The invitation is not one you may refuse. He tilted a hand to look at his watch. The hand had been inaccurately joined to the wrist. He had moved it a long way to see the watch face. You have 5 minutes, he said. You are expected to dress formally. I'm afraid I left my dinner jacket in England. Conrad ignored him and closed the door. Alex swung his legs off the bunk where he had been lying. He had been in the cell ever since his capture at the gate, vaguely wondering what was going to happen next. An invitation to dinner had been the last thing he'd expected. There had been no sign of Juan when he got back. Presumably the young guard had been reprimanded for his failure to watch over Alex and sent home. Or shot. Alex was beginning to realize that the people at the Casa de Oro meant business. He had no idea what Sarah had in mind for him this evening, but he knew that the last time they had met, Alex had only just managed to escape with his life. He resembled the 16-year-old Vladimir. He resembled Sarah's lost son. Sarah must still have some fantasy about adopting him. Otherwise, he would now be dead. He decided that, all in all, it would be wise to play along with this invitation to dinner. At the very least, it might allow him to find out a little more about what was going on. Would the meal be filmed? He wondered. And if so, to what use? He wondered. And if so, to what use would the film be put? Alex pulled a clean shirt. Alex pulled a clean shirt. You remember that the mad headmaster, Dr. Grief, had used hidden cameras at the Point Blanc Academy to spy on the boys who were there. But this was different. The film he had seen in the editing site suit was being cut, pieced together, manipulated. It was going to be used for something, but what? Conrad returned exactly 5 minutes later. Alex was ready for him. Once again, he was escorted out of the slave house and up the steps of classical music. He reached the courtyard and saw his trio, two elderly violinists and a plump lady with a cello, playing what sounded like Bach. The fountain tinkling softly behind them. There were a dozen people gathered there, drinking champagne and eating canapes, which were being carried around on silver trays by white-aproned waitresses. The four bodyguards were standing together in a tight, watchful circle. Another 6 men from the Russian delegation were chatting to the girls from the swimming pool who glittered in sequins and jewelry. The president himself was talking to Sarah, a glass in one hand and a huge cigar in the other. Sarah said something and he laughed out loud, smoke billowing from his lips. Sarah noticed Alex arrived and smiled. "Ah, Alex, there you are. What will you have to drink?" It seemed that the events of the afternoon had been forgotten. At least they weren't to be mentioned again. Alex asked for fresh orange juice, and it was brought at once. "I'm glad you're here, Alex," Sarah said. "I didn't want to start without you." Alex remembered something Sarah had said at the swimming pool. Something about a surprise. He was beginning to have bad feelings about this dinner, but without knowing why. The trio finished a piece of music, and then was a light smattering of applause. Then a gong sounded, and the guests moved into the dining room. This was the same room where Alex and Sarah had eaten breakfast, but it had been transformed for a banquet. The glasses were crystal, the plates brilliant with white porcelain, the knives and forks polished till they gleamed. The tablecloth also white, looking brand new. There were 13 places for dinner, 6 on each side and 1 at the head. Alex noted the number with a further sense of unease. 13 for dinner. Unlucky. Everyone took their places at the table. Sarah had placed himself at the head, with Alex on one side of him, Kirienko on the other. The doors opened and the waitress came back, this time with bowls brimming over with tiny black eggs, which Alex recognized as caviar. Presumably, Sarah had imported from the Black Sea. It must have been worth many thousands of pounds. Russians traditionally drink vodka. Sorry if you're Russian, I don't understand it. With caviar, and as the bowls were positioned around the table, the guests were each given a small tumbler filled to the brim. Then Sarah stood up. "My friends," he began. "I hope you will forgive me if I address you in English. There is unfortunately one guest at this table who has yet to learn our glorious language." There were smiles at the table and a few heads nodded in Alex's direction. Alex looked down at the tablecloth, unsure how to respond. This is for me, a night of great significance. What can I tell you about Boris Nikita Kirienko? He has been my closest and dearest friend for more than 50 years. It is strange to think that I can still remember him as a child who teased animals, who cried when there was a fight, and who never told the truth. Alex glanced at Kirienko. The president was frowning. Sarah was presumably joking, but the joke had failed to amuse his guest. It is even harder to believe that this is the same man who has been entrusted with the privilege, the sacred honor of leading our great country in these difficult times. Boris has come here for a holiday. I'm sure he needs one after so much hard work, and it is a toast that I wish to make tonight. to his holiday, and I hope that it will be longer and more memorable than he had ever expected. There was a brief silence. Alex could see that the guests were puzzled. Perhaps they had difficulty following Sarah's English, but he suspected it was what he had said that had thrown them, not how he had said it. They had come expecting a good dinner, but Sarah seemed to be insulting the President of Russia. "Alexei, my old friend," the President said. Boris had decided that it was a joke. He smiled and continued in his thickly accented English. "Why do you not join us?" he asked. "You know that I never drink spirits," Sarah replied, "and I hope you will agree that at 14, my son is a little too young for vodka." "I drank my first vodka aged 12, the President muttered. Somehow Alex wasn't surprised. Kirienko lifted his glass. "No, Zdarovi," he said. They were the only words of Russian that Alex understood. "Your health. No Zdarovi." Everyone around the table trusted the toast. As one they drank, throwing back the chilled vodka as it traditionally in a single gulp. Sam turned to Alex. "Now it begins," he said quietly. One of the bodyguards was the first to react. He had been reaching out to help himself to some caviar when suddenly his hands jerked, dropping his fork and plate with a crash. Every head turned towards him. A second later, at the other end of the table, one of the men threw himself forward, head first onto the table, his chair capsizing underneath him. Alex watched, his eyes wide with horror. Eddie pressed at the table began to react the same way. One of them fell backwards, dragging the tablecloth with him, glasses and cutlery cascading into his laps. Several of them simply slumped where they sat. Another of the bodyguards managed to get to his feet and was scrabbling for a gun underneath his jacket. But then his eyes glazed and he collapsed. Boris Kirienko was the last to go. He was standing swaying on his feet like a wounded bull. His fist was clenched, as if he knew he had been betrayed, and wanted to strike out at the man who had done it. Then he sat down heavily. His chair tilted and he was thrown onto the floor. Sam muttered a few words in Russian. What have you done?" Alex gasped. "Are they?" "They are unconscious, not dead," Sarah said. "They will of course have to be killed, but not yet." "What are you planning?" Alex demanded. "What is it you're going to do?" "We will have a long journey," Sarah said. "I'll tell you on the way." The entire compound was lit up. Men, guards, and macheteros were running everywhere. Alex was dressed in the clothes he had worn for dinner. Sarah had changed into dark green military dress, this time without his medals. One of the black limousines was waiting. Conrad had driven up at the wheel of an army truck. As Alex watched, two more guards appeared at the main entrance of the Casa de Oro and began to walk down the wide steps. They were moving slowly, carrying something between them. The moment they appeared, everyone around them stopped. It was a large silver chest, about the size of a school trunk. Alex could see that the top was flat metal, but that it had a number of switches and dials, as well as some sort of slot device built into the side. Sarah watched while it was carried over and loaded into the truck. All the other men did the same thing. As if the two guards had just come out of the church, and this was an effigy of a saint. Alex shuddered. He knew exactly what he was looking at, and he didn't need the GG counter to confirm it. This was a nuclear bomb. Alex, Sarah was holding the car door open for him. Dazed, Alex got in. He knew that he had reached the end. Sarah had shown his hand and put into action of a series of events from which this could be no going back. and yet even now, at this late stage, he had no idea what the General intended to do. Sarah sat next to him. A driver got in and they moved off, Conrad following behind in the truck. At the very last moment, as they passed through the barrier, Sarah glanced back very briefly, and it saw the look in his eyes and knew that he had no intention ever to return. There were 100 questions he wanted to ask, but said nothing. This was the time. Sarah was sitting quietly, his hand on his knees, but even he couldn't disguise the tension. Years of planning must have been building up to this. They drove down darkened roads with just occasionally flickers of lights showing that the island was actually inhabited. No other cars came their way. After about 10 minutes, they began to pass buildings. Looking out the out of the window, Alex saw men and women sitting in front of their houses, drinking rum, playing cards, smoking cigarettes or cigars beneath the night sky. They were out on the outskirts. They were out on the outskirts of Santiago, and suddenly they turned a road that Alex recognised. He had taken it on the way in. On the way in. They were going to the airport. This time there were no security, no queues for the passport control. Sarah didn't even have to enter the main terminal building. 2 airport guards were waiting for him at the gate, which was opened to allow him to drive straight onto the runway. The truck followed. Alex looked over the driver's shoulder and saw a plane. A Learjet parked on its own. They stopped. "Out," Sarah said. There was a breeze blowing across the airport runway, carrying with it the smell of aviation fuel. Alex stood on the tarmac, watching as the silver chest was loaded onto the plane. Conrad shouting instructions. He found it hard to believe that such an ordinary-looking thing could be capable of destruction on a massive scale. He remembered films he had seen. Flames and gale-force winds rushing through whole cities, ripping them apart. Buildings crumbling. People turned to ashes in an instant. Cars and buses flicked like toys into oblivion. How could such a terrible bomb with so much power be so small? Conrad closed the cargo door himself. He turned to Sarah and nodded. Sarah gestured. Unwillingly, Alex walked forward and climbed the steps into the plane. Sarah was right behind him. Conrad and the 2 men who had been carrying the bomb followed. The door of the plane was closed and sealed. Alex found himself in a luxurious compartment that was like no plane he had ever been in. There were only a dozen seats, each one upholstered in leather. The compartment was long and thickly carpeted with a well-stocked bar, a kitchen, and in front of the cockpit a 70-centimeter plasma television screen. Alex didn't ask what film they would be showing. He chose a window seat, but they were all window seats. Sarah sat across the aisle from him. Conrad was 1 seat behind Sarah. The 2 guards sat at the far end of the compartment. Alex wondered why they were making the journey. To keep an eye on him? And what journey exactly were they making? Were they crossing into America or travelling across the Atlantic? Sarah must have been reading his mind. "I will explain to you in a moment," he said, "as soon as we are in the air." In fact, it was about 15 minutes before the Learjet took off down the runway and lifted effortlessly out of the ground. The cabin lights dimmed for takeoff, but as soon as they had reached 30,000 feet, they came back on. The guards got up and began to serve hot tea, which had been brewing in an urn in the kitchen. Sarah allowed himself a brief smile. He pressed a button in the arm of his chair and swung round so that he now faced Alex. "You may be wondering why I decided not to kill you," he began. "This afternoon, when I found you in the car, I came so close. Conrad is still annoyed with me. He believes I am making a mistake. He does not understand me. But I will tell you why you are still alive, Alex. You are working for British intelligence. You are a spy and you are only doing your job. I admire that, and this is the reason why I have forgiven you. You are loyal to your country, even as I am loyal to mine. My son Vladimir died for his country. I am proud that you are prepared to do the same for yours. Alex took this in. Where are we going? He asked. We are going to Russia. To be precise, we are going to Murmansk, which is a port on the Kola Peninsula. Murmansk. Alex tried to remember if he had heard the name before. It did seem familiar. Had he heard it in a news bulletin, or perhaps in a lesson at school? A port in Russia. But why would they be going there? And carrying a nuclear bomb? You might like to know our flight path, Sarah continued. We are crossing the Atlantic by the northern route. This involves flying over the Arctic Circle. In essence, we are taking a shortcut, following the curvature of the Earth. We will have to make 2 stops to refuel. One in Gander, in northern Canada, the other in British Isles, in Edinburgh. Sarah must have seen the hopeful expression in Alex's eyes. He went on. Yes, you'll be home for an hour or 2 tomorrow. But please don't get any ideas. You will not be permitted to leave the plane. Will it really take so long to get there? Alex asked. With the first stop and the time difference, yes. We may also have to engage in some diplomatic strained tries with both the Canadian and British authorities. This is Kirienko's private plane. We have filed a flight plan with Eurocontrol, and of course, they recognized our serial number. They believe the president is on board. I would imagine that the Canadian and the British governments might be keeping to offer us hospitality. Who's flying the plane? Kirienko's pilot. He is, however, loyal to me. A great many ordinary Russian people believe in me. Alex, they have seen the future, my future. They prefer it to the version they have been offered by others. You still haven't told me what the future is. Why are we flying to Murmansk? I will tell you now, and then we must both sleep. We have a long night ahead. Sarov crossed his legs. There was a light directly above him, and he beamed down, casting his eyes and mouth into a shadow. He seemed at that moment very old and very young. There was no expression in his face at all. Murmansk, he began, is home to Russia, northern fleet of submarines. It is now quite simply the world's biggest nuclear dustbin. The end of Russia as a world power has led to the rapid collapse of its army, air force and navy. I have already tried to explain to you what has happened to my country in the past 30 years. The way it has been allowed to fall apart with poverty, crime, corruption, sucking the people dry. Well, the process of decay can be seen most starkly in Murmansk. A fleet of nuclear submarines is moored there. I say moored, but I mean abandoned. One of them, the Leaps, is then more than 40 years old and contains 642 bundles of fuel rods. These submarines have been left to rot, and they are falling apart. Nobody cares. Nobody can find the money to do anything about that. It is a well-documented fact, Alex, that these old submarines represent the single biggest threat to the world of today. There are 100 of them. I am talking about 1/5 of the world's nuclear fuel. 100 ticking time bombs waiting to go off. An accident waiting to happen. An accident I've decided to arrange. Alex opened his mouth to break in, but Sarah held up a hand for silence. Let me explain to you what would happen if just one of those submarines were to blow up. He continued. First of all, a huge number of Russians in the Kola Peninsula and the north would be killed. Many more people would die in the neighbourhood countries of Norway and Finland. Unusually, for this time of year, the wind is blowing to the west, so the nuclear fallout would travel over to your country, Europe, to your country. It is very possible that London would become uninhabited. Over the years, thousands more people would fall ill and die slowly. Painful deaths. So why do we do it? Alex shouted. Why cause the explosion? What good will it do? If you like, giving the world a wake-up call, Sarah explained. Tomorrow night I will land in Murmansk and I will place the bomb that you have seen amongst the submarines. He reached into the top book and took out a small plastic card. It has a magnetic strip down one side like a credit card. This is the key that will detonate the bomb, he said. All the codes are information required and contained in the magnetic strip. All I have to do is insert the card into the bomb at the time of the explosion itself. I'll be on my way south to Moscow out of harm's way. The explosion will be felt in every country in the world. You can imagine the shock and the outrage that it will create. And nobody will know that it was caused by a bomb that was deliberately carried to Murmansk. They believe that it was one of the submarines, the Leaps, perhaps, or one of the others. I've already said it was an accident waiting to happen. And when it does happen, nobody will suspect the truth. Yes, they will, Alex said. The CIA know you bought uranium. They'll find out their agents are dead. Nobody will believe in the CIA. Nobody ever believes the CIA. And anyway, by the time they have assembled their evidence against me, it will be too late. I don't understand, Alex exclaimed. You already said you'll kill thousands of your own people. What's the point? You are young. You know nothing about my people. But listen to me, Alex, and I will explain when this disaster happens, the whole world will unite in its condemnation of Russia. We will be hated, and the Russian people will be ashamed if only we had been less careless, less stupid, less poor, less corrupt. If only we were still the superpower that we had once been. And it is at this moment that everyone in Russia and in the world will look to Boris Kirienko for leadership. The Russian president, what will they see? You made a film of him, Alex muttered. You released a film that shows him drunk beside the swimming pool in his red shorts and flower t-shirt playing with 3 half-naked women young enough to be his daughters. And we have interviewed him. We will release that too. You've edited the interview? Exactly, Sarah nodded, his eyes catching the light. Our interviewer asked him about a train strike in Moscow, and Kirienko, who is already half drunk, replied, "This is my holiday. I'm too busy to deal with that. We will change the question. What are you going to do about the accident in Murmansk?" And Kirienko will reply, "This is my holiday. I'm too busy to deal with that." Alex finished his sentence. The Russian people will see Kirienko for the weak, drunken imbecile that he is. They will very quickly blame him for the disaster at Murmansk, and with good reason. The Northern Fleet was once the pride of the whole nation. How could I have been allowed to become a rusting, leaking leather nuclear dump? The plane droned on. Conrad was listening intently to what Sarah was saying, his head balancing unevenly on his neck. The two guards at the back had gone to sleep. You said you would be in Moscow, Alex muttered. It takes less than 24 hours for the government to be swept out of power, Sarah replied. There'll be riots in the street. Many Russians believe that life was better, much better in the old days. They still believe in communism. Well, now their anger will be heard. It will be unstoppable, and I will be there. Too hard to use it to take power. I have followers who are waiting for it to happen before the nuclear cloud is settled. I will have total control of the country, and that is just the beginning, Alex. I will rebuild the Berlin walls. There will be new wars. I will not rest until my kind of government, communist government, is a single dominant in the world. There was a long silence. You prepared to kill millions of people to achieve this? Alex asked. Sarah shrugged. Millions of people are dying. In Russia right now, they can't afford food, they can't afford medicine. And what happened to me? I've already answered that question, Alex. I don't believe it was a coincidence that you turned up the way you did. I believe it was meant to happen. I never meant to do this on my own. And you will be ready to me tomorrow. And when the bomb is primed and ready, we will leave together. First, Murmansk, then Moscow. Don't you see what I'm offering you? You're not just going to be my son, Alex. You are going to have power, Alex. Alex, you are going to be one of the most powerful people in the world. The plane had already reached the coast of America and turned, beginning its journey north. Alex sank back in his seat, his head spinning, absent mindedly. He allowed his hand to slip into one stick of the MI6 bubblegum with him. He also had a little figurine that was actually stun grenade. He closed his eyes and tried to work out what he was going to do. Chapter 15. Security Nightmare. Hours spent in a strange twilight that was neither night nor day. Trapped on the roof of the world, totally still yet hurtling ever further. Alex slept for the first part of the journey, knowing that he was tired and that he would need his strength. He had accepted what he had to do before. What they had seen on Skeleton Key, a small part of him had been tempted to sit back and do nothing. After all, he had never asked to be there, and this had nothing to do with him. But now everything had changed. He could see the nuclear blast in the Kola Peninsula. It was already there in his imagination. Thousands of people would die instantly. Tens of thousands later, as the deadly radioactive particles spread over Europe, Britain would be one of the countries that would suffer. Alex had to stop it happening. He no longer had any choice. It was going to be much more difficult this time. This is going to be much more difficult than I thought it would. It was going to be much. That Sam might have forgotten him for his failed escape attempt in the car, but Alex knew he would no longer trust him, and he couldn't afford to make another mistake. He was caught trying to escape a second time. There would be no reprieve, no mercy in his heart. Alex seriously doubted that he would be able to slip past the Russian general or his twisted companion. Sarah was still completely alert, as if he had been sitting for 10 minutes, not 10 hours. Conrad was still watching him too. He was sitting quietly on the other side of the plane, a cat waiting for a mouse, his red eye blinking in the half-light. And yet, Alex had the two gadgets Smithers had given him, and they were going to be landing in Britain. Just the thought of being in his own country gave Alex new strength. He had a plan, and it would work. It had to. He must have slept through the refueling stop at a gander and several hours of fight, because the next thing he knew, it was light outside and the two guards were clearing away at a breakfast of raw fruit and yogurt that had been prepared in the Learjet's miniature kitchen. He looked out of the window. All he could see was cloud. Servant noticed he had woken up. Alex, are you hungry? No, thank you. Still, you must have something to drink. It's very easy to dehydrate on these long journeys. He spoke a few words of Russian to one of the guards who disappeared and came back with a glass of grapefruit juice. Alex hesitated before bringing it to his lips. Remembering what had happened to Kirienko, Sarah smiled. You don't need to worry, he said. It's just grapefruit juice, no added ingredients. Alex drank. The juice was cold and refreshing after his long sleep. We will be landing in Edinburgh in about 30 minutes, Sarah told him. We're already in British airspace. How does it feel to be home? If you'd like to drop me, I can get a train to London. Sarah shook his head. I'm afraid not. A few minutes later, they began their descent. The pilot had been in radio communication with the airport and had confirmed that this was a routine refueling stop. He would not be picking up any passengers, and so needed no operating permit. Everything had been cleared with the airport authorities, making this touchdown as simple as a car pulling into a local garage. And despite Sarah's fears, the British government had not invited the supposed VIP passengers for a diplomatic breakfast in Edinburgh. The plane broke through the cloud, and with his face pressed against the window, Alex suddenly saw countryside with miniature houses and cars dotted around it. The brilliant sunshine of the Caribbean had been replaced by the great light and uncertain weather of a British summer's day. He set out a sense of relief. He was back, but at the same time he knew Sarah would never allow him off the plane. In a way, it would have been less cruel if they had refueled in Greenland or Norway. He was next being given one last look at his own country. The next time he saw it, it would have been poisoned for generations to come. Alex reached into his pocket. His hands closed around the plastic figurine of the Tyrannosaurus Rex. The time was getting close. The seatbelt sirens came on. A moment later, Alex felt the pressure in his ears as they dropped out of the sky. He saw a bridge, somehow delicate from their side, spanning a great stretch of water. The Forth Road Bridge, it had to be, and there was Edinburgh, over in the west, its castle dominating the skyline. The airport came rushing up. He got a glimpse of a bright modern terminal of waiting planes sitting on the apron, surrounded by vans and trolleys. There was a bump as the wheels made contact with the runway, and then the roar of the engine in reverse thrust. The plane slowed. They landed, guided by the control tower. The Learjet made its way to the end of the runway and into an area known as the fuel farm, far away from the main terminal. Alice gazed out of the window with a sinking feeling as the public buildings slid away, and behind him, for every second that they travelled, he would have further to run to raise the alarm. Always assuming that he did even manage to get off the plane. The dinosaur figure was in his hand now. What had Smithers told him? Twist the head twice, once way and once the other, to arm it. Wait 10 seconds and drop it and run. The confined space of an aircraft cabin seemed the perfect place to try it out. The only question was, how was Alex going to stop it, knocking himself out too? They came to a halt almost at once. A fuel truck began to drive towards them. Sarah had obviously prepared everything well in advance. There was a guy following the truck, and looking out of the window, Alex saw that the steps were being led up to the Learjet store. That was interesting. It seemed that somebody wanted to come on board. Cyrus was watching him. "You will not speak, Alex," he said. "Not a single word before you even think of opening your mouth. I suggest you look behind you." Conrad had moved into the seat directly behind Alex. He had a newspaper balanced in his lap. As Alex turned, he lifted it to reveal a large black pistol with a silencer pointed directly at him. "Nobody will hear anything," Sarah said. "If Conrad even thinks you're about to try something, he will fire. The bullets will pass through the seat and into your spine. Death will be instant, but it will appear that you have simply fallen asleep." Alex knew it wouldn't be as easy as that. A person being shot in the back did not look like a person falling asleep. Sarah was not taking huge risks, but this whole business was a huge risk. The stakes couldn't be higher. Alex had no doubt that if he tried to tell anyone what was happening, he would be killed immediately. The door of the plane opened, and the ginger-haired man in blue overalls entered, carrying a sheaf of papers. There was a road to greet him. "Do you speak English?" the man asked in a Scottish accent. "Yes." "There are some papers for you to sign." Alex turned his head slightly. The man saw him and nodded. Alex nodded back. He could almost feel Conrad pressing the back of his seat with the gun. He said nothing. And then it was over. Sarah had signed the papers and returned the man's pen. "Here's a receipt for you," the man said, handing Sarah the sheet. "And we'll have you back in the air in no time at all." Thank you. Sarah nodded. "Are you going to come out and stretch your legs? It's a pleasant day here in Edinburgh. We can offer you some tea and shortbread if you want to come to the office." "No, thank you. We're all a little tired. We'll stay where we are." "Okay, if you're absolutely sure, I'll get rid of the steps." They were going to take the steps away, and as soon as they were gone, Sarah would seal the door. Alex only had seconds in which to act. He waited until the man had left the cabin, then stood up. Hands were in front of him, and Alex saw carrying lying concealed in his palm. Sit down," Conrad hissed. "It's all right, Conrad," Alex said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just stretching my legs." So had sat down again. He was examining the paperwork the man had given him. Alex strode past him. His mouth was dry, and he was glad the sensor that had been used at the gate of the castle Euro wasn't on the plane. If it had been turned on him now, his heartbeat would have been deafening. This was his last chance. Alex carefully measured out each step. He would only be walking towards his own scaffold. He couldn't have been more tense. "Where are you going, Alex?" Sarah asked. Alex turned around his head twice. "I'm not going anywhere." "What's that you've got in your hand?" Alex hesitated, but he tried to pretend he said nothing. Sarah had become even more suspicious than he already was. He held up the figurine. "It's my lucky mascot," he said. "A Tyrannosaurus Rex." "A Tyrannosaurus Rex." He took another step forward. He gave the dinosaur's head another turn back. He had a very slight kick. "Sit down, Alex," Sarah said. "I've got a headache," Alex said. "I just want some fresh air. You are not to leave the plane." "I'm not going anywhere, Alex." General Alex had already reached the door and felt the Scottish breeze on his face. A tow truck was pulling his steps away. He watched as a gap opened up between them and the door. 4, 3, 2. "Alex, return to your seat." Alex dropped the keyring and threw himself forward. Conrad leaped up like an angry snake, the gun in his hands. The model exploded. There was a flash of light and a bang that sounded massively loud. Although no windows broke, there was no fire or smoke. His eyes ran for a moment. He couldn't see, but he was outside the plane. He had been outside the plane where the stun grenade went off. The steps were still moving away, disappearing in front of him. He was going to miss them. The asphalt surface on the farm apron was 5 meters below. If he fell that distance, he would break a leg. He might even be killed, but he had made his move just in time. He landed flat on his stomach on the top of the staircase, with his feet dangling in the air. Quickly, he pulled himself to the feet. The man with the ginger hair was staring at him, astonished. Alex ran down the still moving steps. As his feet came into contact with the ground, he felt a thrill of triumph. He was home, and it seemed that the stun grenade had done its job. There was no movement on the plane. Nobody was firing at him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the man demanded. Alex ignored. This was the right person to be talking to, and he needed to put as much distance as he could between him and the plane. Smith said the grenade would only incapacitate the enemy for a few minutes. Sarah and Conway would wake up soon, and they would waste no time in coming after him. He ran out of the corner where he saw a man snatch a radio out of his pocket and talk into it. But that didn't matter. There were other men around the place about to start refueling. They must surely have heard the explosion. Even if Alex was recaptured, the plane wouldn't be allowed to leave. But he had no intention of being recaptured. He had already noticed the row of administration buildings on the perimeter of the airfield, and he made for them, the breath rasping in his throat. He reached the door and pulled it out. It was locked. He looked through the window. There was a hallway on the other side and public telephone. But for some reason the building was closed. For a moment he was tempted to smash the glass, but that took too long. Cursing quietly, he left the door and ran 20 meters to the next building. This one was open. He ran in the corridor with storerooms and offices on either side. There didn't seem to be anyone about. Now all he needed was a phone. He tried a door. It led into a room of shelves with a photocopier and stationery supplies. The next door was locked. Alex was getting increasingly desperate. He tried another door, and this time he was lucky. It was an office with a desk, and on the desk a telephone. There was nobody inside. He ran in and snatched it up, but it wasn't out. Only now he realized that he had no idea what number to ring. The mobile that Smithers had given him had been equipped with a hotkey, a direct link to MI6, but nobody had ever given him a direct number. What was he to do? Dial the operator and ask for military intelligence? Would it think he was mad? He didn't have any time to waste. Sarah might already have recovered, and even now he might be on his way. The office had a window, but it looked out the back. There was no sign of the plane or the runaway. Alex made a decision and dialed 999. It was a woman's voice. You have wrong. The emergency services. Which service do you require? Police, Alex said. Connecting to you now. He heard the ringtone, and a hand came down on the telephone, cutting him off. Alex swung around, breathe less, expecting to see Sarah in front of him, or worse, Conrad with a gun. But it was neither of them. It was an airport security guard who had walked into the office while Alex was making his call. He was about 50 years old, with greying hair and a chin that had sunk into his neck. His stomach bulged over his belt, and his trousers stopped about 2 centimeters short of his ankles. The man had a radio attached to his jacket. His name, George Prescott, was written on the badge on his top pocket. He was looming over with a stern look on his face, and with a sinking heart, Alex recognized a real security nightmare. A man with self-important sponges of the traffic warden, the car park attendant, any petty official. "What are you doing here, laddie?" Prescott demanded. "I need to make a telephone call," Alex said. "I can see that, but this isn't a public telephone. This isn't even a public office. This is a secure complex. You shouldn't be in here." No, you don't understand. This is an emergency." "Oh, yes. And what sort of emergency do you mean?" Prescott obviously didn't believe him. "I can't explain. Just let me make the call." The security guard smiled. He was enjoying himself. He spent 5 days a week plodding from one office to another, checking doors and turning off lights. It was good to have someone he could boss about. "You're not making any calls until you tell me what you're doing here," he said. "This is a private office," his eyes narrowed. "Have I opened any drawers? Have you taken Alex? Anything?" Alex's nerves were screaming, but he forced himself to remain calm. I haven't taken anything, Prescott," he said. "I just got off the plane that landed a few minutes ago." "What plane?" "A private plane." Have you got a passport? No. That's a very serious matter. You can't enter a country without a passport. My passport is on the plane. Then I'll escort you back and we'll get it. No! Alex could feel the seconds racing by. What could he say to the man that would persuade him to make the phone call? His mind was in a whirl of study for the first time in his life. He found himself blurting out the truth. Listen, he said. I know this is hard to believe, but I work for the government. The British government. You let me call them. He'll prove it to you. I'm a spy. A spy? Prescott's face broke into a smile. But there was no humour in it at all. How old are you? 14. A 14-year-old spy. I think you've been watching too much television, laddie. It's true. I don't think so. Listen to me, please. A man had just tried to kill me. He's on the plane on the runway, and unless you let me make this call, a lot of people are going to die. What? He's got a nuclear bomb, for God's sake. That was a mistake. Prescott bristled. I'll ask you not to take the name of the Lord in vain. If you don't mind, you come to a decision. I don't know how you got here, what you're playing at, but you're coming with me to security and passport control in the main terminal. You need help, Alex? Come along now. I've had enough nonsense. It isn't nonsense. This man called Sarov, he's carrying a nuclear bomb. He's planning to detonate it in Murmansk. I'm the only one who can stop him. Please, Mr. Prescott, just let me phone the police. It'll only take me 20 seconds, and you can stand there and watch me. Let me talk to them, and afterwards you can take me wherever you like. But the security guard won't budge. You're not making any calls, and you're coming with me now, he said. Alex made up his mind. He had tried pleading, and he had tried telling the truth. And I had succeeded, so he'll just have to take the security guard out. Prescott getting up to it. Alex tensed himself, balancing on the balls of his feet. His fists ready. He knew that the man was only doing his job. He didn't want to hurt him, but there was no other way. Then the door opened. There you are, Alex. I was worried about you. It was Sarov. Conrad with him. Both of them looked ill, their skins white and eyes not quite focused. There was no expression on either man's face. Who are you? Prescott demanded. I'm Alex's father, Sarah replied. Isn't that right, Alex? Alex hesitated. He realized he was still in combat position, about to strike out. Slowly he lowered his arms. He knew it was over and tasted the bitterness of defeat. There was nothing he could do. If he argued in front of Prescott, Sarah would simply kill both of them. If he tried to fight, the result would just be the same. Alex had just one hope left. If he walked out of here with Sarah and Conrad, with the security guard, was still alive, there was a chance that he might tell his story to someone who reported it to MI6. It would certainly be too late for Alex, but the world might still be saved. Isn't that right, Alex? Sarah was ready for an answer. Yes, Alex said. Hello, Dad. So what's all the business about bombs and spies? Prescott asked. Alex inwardly groaned. Why couldn't the man keep his mouth shut? Is that what Alex had been telling you? Sarah asked. Aye, that and a whole lot more beside. Had he made a telephone call? No. Prescott puffed himself up. The wee rascal was helping himself to the phone when I came in, but I soon put a stop to that. Sarah nodded slowly. He was pleased. Well, he does have a vivid imagination, he explained. Alex had not been well lately. He had mental problems. Sometimes he find it hard to distinguish between fantasy and reality. How did he get in here? Prescott demanded. He must have slipped out of the plane when nobody was watching. He had, of course, no permission to be on British soil. Is he British? No. Sarah took hold of Alex's arm. Now we must return to the plane. We still have a long journey ahead of us. Wait a minute. The guard wasn't going to let them off that easily. I'm sorry, sir, but your son was strictly off limits, and for that matter, so are you. You can't just go wandering out around Edinburgh Airport like this. I'm going to have to report this. I quite understand. So didn't seem at all perturbed. I must get the boy back on the plane. I'll leave you with my assistant, who will give you all the details you require. If necessary, he will accompany you to the Superior's office, and I have to thank you for preventing my son from making a telephone call, Mr. Prescott. That would have been most embarrassing for us all. We are waiting for a reply. So returned, and still holding Alex's arm, led him out of the room. Now later, the Learjet took off on the last leg of its journey. Alex was sitting in the same seat as before, but now he was handcuffed to it. Alex hadn't hurt him and no longer seemed even aware that he was on the plane. In a way, Alex had suddenly expected anger, violence, perhaps even a sudden death at the hands of Conrad. But Seraph had done nothing. The moment Alex had been escorted back onto the plane, the Russian hadn't so much as looked at him. There had, of course, been problems. The explosion on the plane and Alex's leap out of it had raised all sorts of questions. The pilot had been in constant communication with the control tower. The sound of the explosion had been a faulty microwave oven, he'd explained. As for the boy, General Alexei Sarov, on the staff of the Russian president, was travelling with a nephew. The boy had high spirits, very stupid, but everything was under control. If this had been an ordinary private jet, the police would have been called, but it was registered to Boris Kirienko. It had diplomatic immunity. All in all, the authorities agreed it would be easier to turn a blind eye and let it go. George Prescott's body was discovered 4 hours later. He was sitting slumped in a stationary cupboard. There was a look of surprise on his face and a single round bullet wound between his eyes. By then, the Lear was in Russian airspace. Even as the alarm was raised and the police were finally called, the cabin lights were dimmed as the jet curved over the Kola Peninsula, preparing for its final descent. But it would not be the end of me reading you Alex Rider Book 3 and this episode. So bye-bye everyone, and thank you for listening to this.